What would you do if a teacher pointed to the school janitor, just to make a joke, and then watched that man solve a calculus problem better than anyone else in the room? It happened in a quiet high school classroom, where one man, ignored for years, answered with calm, precision, and a kind of brilliance no one expected. But what shocked them most wasn't that he knew the answer. It was what they discovered about his past, and what followed after. This isn't just a story about math. It's about dignity, missed potential, and what happens when someone finally sees beyond the uniform. And the moment it went viral, everything changed, not just for the students, but for the entire school. Let's go back to where it happened on a Thursday afternoon, in a classroom that felt like it had long forgotten what inspiration looked like. Mr. Hardwick, known more for his sarcasm than his teaching, stood by the board scribbling another equation. The students barely looked up. Some scrolled through their phones under the desk, others simply stared at the clock, willing the period to end. The scent of old eraser dust hung in the air. The only sound was the squeak of shoes outside the hallway, until Mr. Hardwick paused and turned toward the door. Clarence Miller, the school janitor, had just rolled his cleaning cart past the room. Without missing a beat, Mr. Hardwick, in a tone thick with mockery, called out, "Hey Clarence, care to solve this one for us?" A few students chuckled. It was meant to be funny, not cruel. Just one of those things people say when they assume someone won't respond, but Clarence did. He stepped into the classroom, not hurried, not hesitant. His uniform was worn but clean, his posture straight. No one expected him to walk up to the board. No one expected him to pick up the marker. And certainly, no one expected him to solve a problem that half the class hadn't even attempted. Clarence scanned the equation, an advanced chain rule derivative, and began to write. Slowly at first, then with quiet confidence. He didn't rush. He didn't perform. He simply worked it out, line by line, explaining each step in a calm voice that carried more clarity than most had ever heard in that room. When he finished, he capped the marker and stepped back. The room was silent. No jokes, no giggles, just stunned silence, like the air itself had thickened. Clarence looked at Mr. Hardwick, nodded once, then turned and walked out, pushing his cart without another word. Behind him, something shifted. Not just in that room, but in how everyone saw him from that moment on. And as one student quietly hit record on their phone, they didn't know it yet, but that clip would change more than just a classroom dynamic. It would upend everything. By the time the school bell rang the next morning, the video had already crossed 3,000 views. By lunch, it was on TikTok's For You pages across the state. Students added captions like, "Our janitor just humbled the calc teacher," and "Clarence was low-key genius." The clip showed it all. Mr. Hardwick's sarcastic smirk fading into stunned silence, Clarence's steady hand on the marker, and a classroom too quiet for a Thursday afternoon. In the hallways of Lincoln High, Clarence Miller was no longer invisible. Kids who had never said a word to him were now giving nods, fist bumps, even asking for help with their homework. Some did it as a joke at first, but when he answered their questions with the same clarity and patience he'd shown at the board, the tone changed. They began to mean it. Over in the teacher's lounge, the mood wasn't as light. A few staff members laughed nervously as they watched the clip on someone's phone. Some were impressed, others seemed uncomfortable. Mr. Hardwick hadn't said much. He just kept his arms folded, his face unreadable. For Clarence, the attention felt strange. He still clocked in at 6:45 a.m. sharp, swept the East Wing first, emptied the faculty lounge bin second. His routine didn't change, but the way people looked at him did. There was a shift in how doors opened around him. A pause before people spoke. He wasn't used to being noticed, and certainly not for his mind. But for the students, especially those who had never seen someone like Clarence in a position of quiet command, the moment meant something. It wasn't just about the math, it was about the way he carried himself. The way he solved the problem, not for praise, not to prove a point, but simply because he could. For older folks watching from the sidelines, retired teachers, veterans, bus drivers, there was something familiar in that kind of dignity. A reminder of the people they had worked beside, those who never needed the spotlight to lead. They saw Clarence and thought of old friends, brothers, fathers, men whose brilliance often lived in the background, waiting for the world to finally pay attention. And as the views kept climbing, one quiet question echoed through the school and far beyond. Who exactly is Clarence Miller? When Principal Daniels knocked on the janitor's closet that Monday morning, Clarence was already folding a fresh stack of microfiber towels. He didn't seem surprised by the visit, just nodded once, stepped aside, and let her in. The closet was small. Bare shelves, a mop bucket, an old radio, but it was neat. Like everything Clarence touched, it had order. She didn't waste time. "I wanted to ask you something," she said, her voice careful. "That problem you solved in Mr. Hardwick's class. You knew exactly what you were doing." Clarence looked at her, then quietly said, "Yes, ma'am." There was a pause. Principal Daniels studied him. "Where'd you learn that kind of calculus?" Clarence took a slow breath. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Inside was a folded ID card. Purdue University. Mechanical engineering. His name still clear beneath the faded print. "Full ride," he said. "Class of '98. I had a semester left." She looked up. "What happened?" He didn't flinch. "My mom got sick, lung cancer. She didn't have anyone else, so I left school, came home, took care of her until the end." He paused. Didn't feel right going back after that. Life kept moving. There was nothing self-pitying in his tone. No hint of regret, just facts, delivered the way Clarence always did. Clean, quiet, and steady. Principal Daniels nodded slowly. "You ever think about finishing?" He shrugged. "Sometimes. But then I think about bills, my sister's kids, the roof needing patching. Life's full of choices. I made mine." For people like Clarence, the world didn't offer second chances. Not because they weren't earned, but because no one ever asked if they were wanted. Most folks just assumed janitors arrived at their jobs by default. No one imagined a former engineering student folding towels at 7 a.m. and doing chain rule derivatives in his head while mopping a hallway. But Principal Daniels wasn't most folks. She saw the edges, the ones that don't show up on resumes. Later that day, she sat alone in her office, still holding the faded Purdue ID. Around her, the school buzzed with gossip, with glances toward the man who had done what no one expected. But she wasn't thinking about the views or the hashtags. She was thinking about all the kids who might finally see someone who looked like them, talked like them, and yet knew things they were told they'd never understand. And she wondered, not for the first time, how many lives had been missed because no one had ever bothered to ask, "What did you give up to be here?" Clarence never planned to be a janitor, but life doesn't always honor plans. After leaving Purdue, he picked up jobs where he could: auto shop, delivery routes, warehouse night shifts. Whatever paid the bills and left time to help at home. None of it came with a title anyone admired, but it kept the lights on, kept food on the table, kept dignity intact. When his mother passed, Clarence stayed. His little sister had 2 kids by then, and the family needed someone steady. By the time he took the position at Lincoln High, the math textbooks were already 10 years old, but he kept them. He stored them in a milk crate beside his bed, reread them on weekends, sometimes scribbled problems in the margins of old receipts. Not to prove anything, just to keep the gears turning. Every now and then, he'd solve equations in his head while scrubbing a whiteboard. He'd rework integrals on his break using the back of a flattened lunch bag. No one knew. He didn't think anyone needed to. His job was to keep the school clean, and he took pride in that. Floors should shine, trash should be gone before anyone notices. It was honest work. He never asked for more. But that quiet diligence, day after day, year after year, wasn't just habit. It was a form of preservation, a way of holding on to the parts of himself the world didn't ask for anymore. Most people assumed Clarence Miller had no past worth asking about. He didn't correct them. That's not the kind of man he was. For people watching from the outside, especially older folks who'd been through their own share of detours, his story hit deep. They'd known men like Clarence. Men who wore their pride without needing to say much. Men who sacrificed dreams without turning bitter. Men who kept their minds sharp even when the world stopped expecting anything from them. And when that viral clip brought Clarence into view, those same people saw something the younger crowd hadn't yet learned. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who never ask to be seen. They just wait, quietly, patiently, until the moment asks for them. By the end of the week, students were waiting for Clarence before he even finished his rounds. Not to ask where the lost and found was, not to report a broken faucet. They were asking about math. At first, it was a handful, kids who had seen the video and wanted to test the waters. "Mr. Miller, how would you do this one?" they'd say, half serious, half curious. Clarence always paused, looked at the problem, and offered an answer. Not just the solution, but the thinking behind it. No showmanship, no lectures, just clarity. Word spread. The quiet man with the mop cart had become the best math mind on campus. Soon, students were meeting him in the library after school. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. He never charged a dime, never asked for anything in return. His only request: show up on time, bring your own pencil, and be ready to think. The questions got harder. The group got bigger. At first, Clarence didn't think much of it. He saw it as helping kids who needed a hand. But when he overheard two juniors explaining the chain rule to a freshman using his exact words, something shifted. He realized he wasn't just solving problems. He was shaping the way they thought. Teachers began to notice. A few were skeptical. Others were quietly impressed. Parents sent emails to the school, thanking Mr. Miller for helping their children pass their exams. The principal forwarded each one to Clarence, who read them slowly, then folded them neatly and slipped them into his coat pocket. He never replied. He didn't need to. One afternoon, as he was leaving campus, a sophomore named Caleb Jenkins ran up, panting, holding a crumpled test paper. "I passed," he said. "First time I've ever passed math. I just wanted you to know." Clarence looked at the boy, then nodded once. "Good," he said. "Now help someone else." That line stayed with Caleb. It stayed with a lot of them. For the older generation watching this unfold, retired educators, factory workers, folks who'd raised their kids on late-night shifts and quiet strength, Clarence represented something they recognized. A kind of leadership that didn't demand attention, but earned it. A man who taught without a title, who showed that authority doesn't come from position, it comes from consistency. And as more students lined up for help after school than for detention, it became clear. Something was changing at Lincoln High. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. It started with a fold-out table, a couple of chairs, and a hand-drawn sign taped to the wall. "Math help, 3:30 p.m., library side room." Nothing official, nothing fancy, but every afternoon that room filled. Kids from all grades came in carrying notebooks, calculators, and questions they hadn't dared ask in class. Clarence didn't stand at the front. He sat among them. When one student stumbled, he didn't correct, he guided. When someone got it right, he didn't clap, he nodded. Respect in, respect out. Before long, the students gave the gatherings a name: Miller's Sessions. It wasn't just about math anymore. It became a space where no one was embarrassed for not knowing something, where you could ask the same question twice and still be met with patience. The kind of space that didn't exist in most classrooms, not because teachers didn't care, but because systems didn't allow for it. Clarence never kept attendance, never handed out grades, but kids kept coming back, not because they had to, because they wanted to. Principal Daniels sat in on one of the sessions one Tuesday. She didn't announce herself, just took a seat in the back and watched. She saw Clarence walk a student through a word problem, not by solving it for her, but by helping her see the logic hidden beneath the words. She saw another student offer an explanation in his own words, and Clarence stepped back, letting him lead. She saw confidence where there had once been fear. Later that week, she called him into her office. "What you're doing," she said, "it's working. I'd like to offer you a stipend. Something small for now, but official. And if you're open to it, we could turn these sessions into something permanent." Clarence was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "If it stays how it is, no grades, no pressure, then yes." She smiled. "Then let's do it." For the older generation watching this happen, grandparents raising grandkids, retired teachers who had once fought for after-school programs that never got funded, it was something they hadn't seen in a long time. Education rooted in care, not compliance. A man with no classroom, no curriculum, but more impact than any test score could measure. And as one student walked out of the room that Friday evening, she looked at her friend and said, "This is the only place I don't feel stupid." The door shut behind them with a quiet click. Inside, Clarence stayed behind, collecting scraps of paper filled with numbers, half-solved equations, and ideas still forming. He didn't smile, didn't sigh, just stacked the papers carefully, turned off the light, and locked the room behind him. Some revolutions don't need slogans, just an open chair and someone who listens. Not everyone welcomed the change. While most teachers said little, a few began to shift in their seats during staff meetings whenever the name Clarence Miller came up. Mr. Hardwick, in particular, had grown quiet, not the brooding kind, but the type that signaled something deeper. His lessons were shorter now, his tone sharper. When a student asked if Mr. Miller's method was better, he didn't answer. He just erased the board with a little more force than usual. The tension wasn't spoken aloud, but it hung in the halls, between classrooms, between glances, between those who taught by mandate and those who taught by presence. Some teachers felt inspired. Others felt exposed. After all, what did it mean when a man without credentials was reaching students more effectively than some who'd spent years in formal training? Principal Daniels saw it coming. She had seen it before. How institutions protect themselves, how status resents interruption. She called Mr. Hardwick into her office on a Thursday after school. The conversation was brief. "He's not trying to take your place," she said. Mr. Hardwick didn't look up. "Doesn't need to. The kids already think he's smarter than the rest of us." She paused. "Maybe they don't think that. Maybe they just feel heard. And if that's the case, then we should ask ourselves why they didn't feel that before." He didn't respond. Daniels leaned forward. "You've been here a long time. You know how to teach, but maybe it's time to remember how to learn." For older folks watching this unfold, those who'd worked under people who feared change more than failure, it felt familiar. They'd been passed over, silenced, or warned not to make waves. And they knew the truth. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a room isn't rebellion. It's humility that works. Outside the office, Clarence walked past, carrying a stack of graph paper someone had donated for the next session. He didn't glance through the glass door. He didn't hear the conversation. But Mr. Hardwick did. He watched him move, not like a man disrupting the system, but like someone simply doing what needed to be done. Later that night, Hardwick sat at his desk, staring at an old calculus textbook he hadn't opened in years. He flipped through the pages slowly. The equations were still there. So were the answers. But now, the questions felt different. It happened on a Tuesday. The library side room was already half full when Clarence arrived. Students hunched over notebooks, murmuring through equations. He set his bag down, greeted a few familiar faces, and began the day's session like always. No announcements, no introductions. But then a new voice broke the rhythm. "Mind if I sit in?" Heads turned. At the door stood Mr. Hardwick, holding nothing but a notepad and a mechanical pencil. He looked older in that moment, not in years but in posture. Less guarded, less sure. Clarence met his eyes, then nodded toward the empty chair near the far table. "Seats open," he said. And just like that, Mr. Hardwick became a student again. He didn't try to take over. He didn't hover near the board or correct anyone mid-sentence. He just listened. Asked a few questions. Jotted notes quietly. When a junior stumbled on a logarithmic function, Hardwick leaned in, not to critique, but to ask, "How did Clarence explain it to you?" The student smiled and walked him through it. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. The room had shifted. Clarence never acknowledged it out loud. He treated Hardwick like anyone else, equal seat, equal time. But those watching saw something rare. Two men from different corners of the same building, both choosing humility over ego. No ceremony, no apology. Just an understanding that had been missing for too long. After the session ended, Clarence began packing up. Mr. Hardwick lingered. "You've got a gift," he said quietly. Clarence looked at him and replied, "So do you. Just gotta remember how to use it." For the older generation, those who had spent years in spaces where pride kept people apart, this was the moment they waited for. A handshake without words, a lesson without a lecture, a recognition that respect, when earned honestly, doesn't threaten, it teaches. That night, a student uploaded a photo of the session. Two men, one chalk-stained, one in a janitor's jacket, both leaning over the same problem. The caption read, "No rivalry, just learning." And that image did more than any headline could. Because it wasn't about who had the title. It was about who showed up with an open mind. The school showcase was never a big affair. Just a few tables in the gym, student projects on display, some coffee and cookies in the corner. Parents wandered through, teachers made small talk, and a few local board members showed up out of obligation more than interest. But this year there was something different. Near the back of the gym, beneath the flicker of a dim overhead light, sat a simple folding table with a handwritten sign, "Miller's Table." No decorations, no poster boards, just a wooden box and a small stack of index cards. Each one held a note, written by students in their own words. "He taught me math, but more than that, he taught me I wasn't dumb. I never raised my hand in class before. With him I asked questions every time. Mr. Miller didn't fix my grades, he fixed how I saw myself." There were dozens of them, some scribbled in pencil, others neatly typed, some with smudges from nervous hands, but all of them honest, all of them real. Clarence didn't stand near the table. He stayed by the exit, his custodial badge still clipped to his shirt. When someone pointed out the display, he just nodded. He hadn't read every note. He didn't need to. The room's energy told him enough. Mr. Hardwick passed by. He stopped, read a few cards, then placed his own folded note in the box. No name, no title, just a short sentence. "You reminded me what this job is supposed to be." For the older generation standing along the gym wall, arms crossed, eyes steady, this was the kind of moment that stayed with you. No applause, no microphone, just a quiet truth taking its rightful place. They had waited years to see something like this. A man whose impact wasn't in plaques or paychecks, but in the words students whispered long after class ended. Clarence looked across the room. He saw one of his students, Caleb Jenkins, guiding his younger cousin through a math game he'd created. Clarence smiled barely, then stepped outside into the cool evening air. He lit a cigarette, not out of habit, but out of ritual. A pause, a breath. He didn't need a classroom. He didn't need a title. Because legacy, he had come to understand, isn't measured in recognition. It's measured in what others carry forward when you're no longer in the room. And in that moment, with the echo of young voices behind him and the night folding in around the school, Clarence Miller finally allowed himself to believe he had done enough. In a world that often equates worth with titles and visibility, Clarence Miller's story reminds us that the most profound impact doesn't always come from the spotlight. It comes from consistency, humility, and showing up for others when no one's watching. His quiet strength, built not on credentials but on care, challenges a system that too often overlooks those who serve with dignity rather than degrees. The lesson isn't just about education or second chances. It's about how we value people. How many lives have we dismissed because we didn't bother to ask who they were before they took the job they have now? How often have we mistaken silence for absence or uniform for limitation? For anyone who's ever been underestimated or told their moment had passed, Clarence's journey is proof that purpose doesn't expire. And for those in positions of power, it's a call to listen deeper, to recognize leadership that doesn't come with a nameplate. In life, legacy is not what we accumulate, but what we pass on. And sometimes, the greatest change starts not with a speech or a title, but with a folded note, a second chance, or a willingness to sit and learn beside someone we thought we already knew. Clarence never asked to be seen. He didn't campaign for recognition or fight for a bigger paycheck. All he did was show up, day after day, with quiet discipline and a mind still sharp, still hungry, still willing to serve. And in doing so, he didn't just teach math. He reminded everyone, students, teachers, and all of us watching, that value isn't given by job titles. It's revealed through character. So if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever done the right thing when no one was watching, if you've ever wondered whether quiet strength matters in a noisy world, this story is your answer. Because justice doesn't always arrive with a gavel. Sometimes it walks in wearing work boots, carrying nothing but truth and time. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel. We tell stories like this because they deserve to be told. And before you go, drop a comment below. Type 1 if you've ever seen someone underestimated simply because of their job or appearance. Type 2 if you believe that real respect is earned, not awarded. Your voice matters. Let's make sure people like Clarence are never overlooked again.